Kamara looked over the breakfast table at Caslin. Her sister was usually a heavy sleeper, but it looked like she hadn't slept a wink. Dark purple bags hung under her eyes. At least they still looked like a matched set. "You couldn't sleep either?" Mara said, after sipping her tea. Lynn only shook her head and groaned. At least that hadn't changed. "How soon do you think we should wait before texting Desi?" Lynn leaned forward over her tea and looked like she needed to pry her eyelids open. "Midday? She probably hasn't slept." "Yeah. I hope he's all right. I can't stop thinking about him lying there," Mara said after a moment. "Or the body. You saw the uniform, right?" Mara nodded. That was going to be a story, if they ever actually heard it. "What about texting Aku? I mean, we didn't show him a very good..." "Oh, goddess, don't remind me." Lynn's head slammed forward into the table, and one eye glared balefully at her through a tangle of silver hair. "We're never going to live that down. Nobody should hear about that. Ever. We can't just not call him. I mean, not invite him back. He really wanted to see the music collection." Mara knew she was rambling, but she was allowed to be tired too. "You don't want word to get around that we ditched a cliff singer?" "Oh, Empress." Lynn rolled up and back in her seat, pulling her hair. "That's all we need." Tavi had every right to be proud. She'd been appointed Assistant Vizier for almost 3 months before the court departed with the Empress. It was a proud title. It had prospects. At a midpoint in her career, she was just where she needed to be. Alright, she was too junior to join the royal court on the expedition with the Empress, but someone had to stay behind and keep things running. There were opportunities to be made right here as a trusted advisor to the royal family. Of course, now the princess was home. Less than 24 hours, and the young woman had been acting as if she were the Empress. There was the whole sordid affair that the Interior was staying mum about. But Her Royal Highness had been making demands for information on her school, and even presumed to dispatch a medevac to the doctor, dedicated to her cousin's husband. Just as the child seemed to be on the cusp of becoming an adult, she was flying off in all directions. It was enough to make one sniff. The young lady clearly was expecting the bureaucracy to be impressed, but whatever for? She hadn't made her mark in polite society, and until recently, she'd been slated for an advantageous marriage. Of course, then the heir died. Now, all bets were off. It was inconvenient, but Tavi hurried along at a reasonable hour of the morning to present herself. Doubtless tired and sleeping in, she timed her arrival at the princess's quarters splendidly, ready to present herself to Her Royal Highness, however exasperating that might prove. "She's not in," Lady Wakama said fatly. "What? Did I stutter? She's out, busy. Doesn't have time for the likes of you," Wakama replied, nonplussed, then added, "Your mouth is open, Tavi. You look like a fish." "Well, there's no call for that sort of talk. Where has Her Royal Highness gone off to? I may prove to be of some assistance in her return to palace life." "There's a first for everything." Tavi looked at the woman coolly, not rising to the bait. "If it pleases you, lady, don't go trying to smum up to me. I don't have time for it." Wakama shook her head and stood her ground at the doors to the princess's apartments like a golden glaive, but after a moment she quirked an eyebrow. "Her Royal Highness has been away this morning, sending some correspondence in the communications room." "I see." She hid her befuddlement with a low bow before strolling back up the hall. Infuriating woman. Kalira will be out of that school in another 2 years, and then we'll see if you're even still here. Tavi rounded the corner and checked both ways for any onlookers before scurrying toward the comm room. I don't want to discuss it. When I graduate, I want to go to medical school. I want to work to save people, not just turn around and go straight into pharmaceuticals. Scifi kept her head down and focused on her dinner. That's just all there is to it. Not going to join the company? Severlan shook her head and glanced over at Avan. Did you hear that? She doesn't want to join the company. Oh, as far as that, I was talking to Predan, you remember? Avan poked at the casserole. He said their daughter is very keen on botany. Sulin leaned over and cleared her throat. I think what Severlan is asking is why you've suddenly decided against joining the company after medical school. Because Jawa, dear? Avan asked solicitously, offering over the tureen to his wives. I'm trying to have a conversation with our daughter, Severlan huffed, shaking her head. Your mother is trying to talk to you, Sephir. Avan settled down and looked at his wives, then over to Trelia and Nalay. Girls, why don't you go check on Sendru? Your mothers and I want to talk to Sephir for a bit. Sephir, I'm about to lose my temper. Severlan wiped at her tusks and tossed the napkin down on the table. I'm trying to talk to you. You're trying to tell me what to do with my life, Sephir bit out. You're talking at me, not with me. Where is that dessert? Avan looked down at the table. I thought I asked them to make your favourite, Severlan. I should... Avan, please, she bridled, raising her voice. I am trying to ask Sephir some questions. Then you shouldn't have to shout, Sephir said quietly. I didn't shout. Did I shout, Sulin? Not particularly, she replied, before taking a sip of water. And if I wanted to shout, it's our home. I'm entitled to shout if it's something to shout about, Severlan sighed, then ran a hand back through her hair, settling herself. So, please explain to me why you want to stay a doctor after medical school. Because I want to be a doctor. Sephir focused on her dinner harder, no longer meeting anyone's eyes. I see. Let's just presume you keep up your grades. Do you know what doctors earn? After their time in residence with no lives at all? She shook her head. How many doctors have to wait years before they're on stable ground and able to start a family? Sephir looked up. The whole family argument was a low blow. They knew she worked hard for her grades. Whatever it is, she earns it. Sephir, are you suggesting that a pharma company doesn't earn its money? Sulin stepped in, as Sephir looked like she was turning purple. Your mother and I each earn 10 times what a doctor can make. There's a lot more to life than just earning money for the house. Sephir wanted to grind her teeth so badly, but she said it quietly. There's helping people, caring for people in need. And you think we don't care? Severlan raised her voice again. Who do you think finds all the cures? Where did you get ideas like that? Questioning the path we worked so hard to provide for you. Professor Warwick says that we need to question things to arrive at the truth. That we need to ask questions that I don't care what some human has to say. I've been hearing about him ever since you got in the shuttle, and it's enough to last the rest of my life. And that's it, isn't it? Sephir bit out. It was just too much. I've done everything you've asked my whole life to be the perfect daughter. Top grades, all the teams. I could do a lot worse in my life than listening to someone who lost everything and still cares about other people more than himself. Just listen to yourselves, both of you. Sephir rose from the table and was out the door before Ivan could stop her. He looked at both his wives and reached out to put a hand on Severlan, who was still shaking in anger. "It's that Warwick, putting these alien ideas in her head," she growled. "When we go back at the end of the week, I'm going to have a few words about that human." Adam McGuinness never got over the view of deep space. They were finally dropping back into normal space at the hyperlimit for Shill. Mission accomplished. It was time to go home and spend time doing the public dog and pony show for a while. Now, here he was, standing on the deck of his very own ship, listening to the chatter of the watch crew, as Captain Galadon sat at the con. As a prince of the Empire, and husband of Her Royal Highness, Princess Indara, he was the most important person on the bridge, but he felt completely useless. The crew of Princess Indara's personal starship was hand-picked and knew what they were doing. Navy career and Marines to a woman. They cleaned up well, and knowing their core mission, they took to the uniforms of royal servants with relative ease. Everything looked the part for a princess and her family, and there were plenty of pictures on the datanet of the yacht's lavish gymnasium, luxurious facilities, studios, dining halls, and bedrooms. That wasn't mentioning the 2 whole squads of human veterans that made the bows of the ship their home, away from prying eyes. The crew knew they were there, but they were hand-picked and each had signed writs of Imperial secrecy. Officially, the operatives living on the lower decks didn't exist in any capacity. Unofficially, trysts between the occasional bold Shilvanti Marine and bored human special operator became a topic of many counselling statements aboard the vessel. Mostly, the boys and girls were working hard and playing well with each other, in about every sense. Most of the pictures on the datanet of Princess Indara's personal yacht were fabricated garbage. Looking around the bridge, the reality was a very different story. The family yacht, ferry called the Love Tub, had more firepower than a frigate and a crew that knew how to use it. Alright, the gym in their bedroom kicked ass too. Of course, that wasn't the only perk of family life these days. While the role was entirely covert, being Inquisitor to Empress Kamalesh Tasu, along with her late mother, had proven satisfying. Kami had promised him and the girls carte blanche to do what they did best, and over the years they hadn't disappointed. Of course, that didn't always mean a quick shot in the dark. That was another benefit of having a yacht on call. TSC 3491P2 had been on the Imperial roster for colonization. Damn shame the whole terraforming team, or shillforming really, had unintentionally created a deadly plague and been wiped out. The only reasonable thing was to place the entire system under total quarantine. It was too far out for regular traffic, a graveyard paradise, orbited by automated sentries to protect the Empire from the curious and unwary. Of course, it was a total sham. The teams had been pulled off without a whisper, and TSC 3491 disappeared, yanked off the colonization roster by royal decree. After a few months, the Imperial Colonial Ministry had things back on schedule, and TSC 3491P2 disappeared into the footnotes of the datanet. Forgotten. Violence wasn't always the answer, and as a black bag site, it made a perfect place to dump people you didn't quite want to kill. Shill-formed worlds generally produce enough ready food in the wild to keep anyone alive, and there the planet boasted over 93 million square miles of land across 9 minor continents and thousands of islands. spread out across the planet and tracked from orbit by those same silent defenses. Anyone dropped there would never find another living soul. As of 6 weeks ago, it was now home to its 86th resident. And anyway, the ear tag still made him grin. Fuck. That's what I call job satisfaction. The momentary break in routine caught his attention, as Galadon cleared her throat. Inquisitor, we have multiple priority messages incoming, flagged from the palace for Princess Indara. Thanks, Gal. Class is down in our rooms. Raise the other girls. Adam nodded as he made for the lift. I'll head down, and we'll take it there. Garnia waited until Pelly had closed the door, before turning to her guest. Agent Duvari, she said, with a clipped but cordial tone. Thank you for coming. I expect that right now you have more demands on your time than most professors during the break, so I'll be brief. Garnia pulled out her omnipad and flipped the file towards the wall screen. Names began to scroll down. Yes, that is the bonny lady of Cambria. Don't let them fool you. Cambrians are sentimentalists at heart, once you dig somewhat. And yes, the list starts at archduchesses after that, then duchesses. It goes all the way down to dame. There's even a margravine. They're alumni, parents, and all of them, shall hear from me in one mass email unless I'm entirely satisfied when you leave this office. The young woman looked back, running her eyes over Garnia as if studying something unfamiliar. After a moment, she narrowed her eyes. You're bluffing. You missed seeing me on preterm night, and you were busy during the social. I suggest you join me for the solstice party. Walk with me for an hour, look at my social circle, then you're entirely at liberty if you still think I'm bluffing. I understand you put several of my students, some of my staff, and myself under Order 24. Well, I am a proud citizen of the Empire, but you've also cost the life of a dear, dear friend, Velisti Markeith. Garnia held her head high, and didn't take her eyes off the agent. I've indulged your presence here. However, you've endangered my other children. I believe it's time you tell me exactly what's going on, or I hit send, and every one of those women will be receiving a message. It's already written. Garnia picked up her glass of Abeki juice and took a thoughtful sip, before setting it down firmly on the desk. Agent Avari, don't fuck with me. What? Tavi said again. This was ridiculous. She was here an hour ago, Vizier. The comms specialist nodded earnestly, as Tavi crossed her arms, standing over the woman. It made her feel better, but it didn't help matters. Wait, Karma? That stubborn old Turok, she must have known. Sent me chasing my tail halfway across the palace. We'll see about that. Fine, she sniffed. This is the communications center. I expect you know how to communicate. Where is Her Royal Highness right now? The tech shifted nervously. She's out. Out? What do you mean out? Tavi puffed herself up, her gaze raining displeasure. You're supposed to keep track of the Imperial persons at all times, on the palace grounds. Now where is she? Tell me at once! Out, ma'am. The tech shrugged squeamishly. She took a team of guards, but she classified her destination. I can't tell you because we don't know. I never thought I'd want to get back to homework, Jaxmi sighed. It wasn't quite noon, and she spent most of the morning hiding out in her room. Not even a day home, and her mothers had all but quashed anything to do with the new Silk Road. While they hadn't quite called it a pipe dream, there were so many more opportunities closer to home. She was the oldest and should set an example for her younger sisters. Yes, She'd made her money back, but it relied on a one-time event. This might all turn out to be a fad. By the time their personal shuttle got them home, she felt like slitting her wrists. Parents! She loved her mothers, but they could be so conservative about trying something different. House Chelksa had prospered by the business, but it thrived because it had looked to new markets. At least father had seen the potential, and her 4 sisters were home and waiting to hear everything. That had helped lighten the mood. Most of them had been over the moon about the silk scarf she bought them and wanted to know everything. By the end of the night, Jadzi had even been whispering in her ear about getting a bikini. But all that really happened was that the battle lines were drawn. Her mums didn't want to say anything to put off Dad, and her sisters were lending various levels of support, but it felt like a line had been drawn in the sand. Unless she had something to show them, this wasn't a fad. She could forget about expanding the company. The idea of hiring permanent employees for packing and shipping while she was at school wasn't going to happen. She could take her profits. Uncle Jemsy seemed proud, so she could get to Earth. Now, just put it all off for 2 more years and start over after graduation. Unless someone stole the idea by then. Her Omnipad pinged again. She'd been checking it. The texts from some of the others had been odd. Something had happened. Still, it didn't tell her much, and she had a lot on her mind. Pulling up the Omnipad, she looked at the latest mail, and blinked. She checked the sender's address. Maybe Jadzi was having a laugh. The address wasn't fake. No one faked a government address, but this... No. This couldn't be right. Could it? Goddess, could it? To Ms. Jaxmi Chelksa. Greetings. A royal warrant is a mark of recognition that an individual or company has supplied goods or services to the royal family, offering an unparalleled mark of excellence and quality. Special attention has been affirmed from Her Royal Highness, Princess Kalira, on your singular efforts to promote regional exports and unite them with local artisan producers. This grant of royal warrants allows the grantee, New Silk Road, to use the words by appointment, and it is extended to you for your use in all correspondence in our regard to your exemplifying all that is best about the Imperium, pride in the quality of your product, and a commitment to the future. Yours sincerely, Caledon Havla, Correspondence Officer. Adam looked around the cabin and licked his lips. He hadn't realized he'd been keeping them pressed tight, while Classy read off the screen to the rest of them. So, Calandri's dead, Kami's taken the whole court on the road, and someone's already tried to off Kelly in her own school. Essentially, Classy bit out. She had the quiet, collected look she got right before the old ultra-violence, and Fairy moved over and laid a hand on her shoulder. Looking at him from the other couch, Slip cocked her head at him, and Sarah arched an eyebrow. He mashed a finger down on the comm. Bridge? Galadon here. The voice came back at once. He wasn't surprised. Gal, we have a problem. We need to get back to Shill yesterday. What's our best time on target? 56 hours if you want us to look like a yacht, Your Highness. I can manage 39 hours if you want our cover blown. Adam looked back at Classy. He didn't have to think about it twice. Captain, today we're a very fast yacht. Priscilla glanced over at Belder while they waited. Belle was nice. Honestly, just a wholesome kind of gal. If anyone deserved to find a nice guy, Belle certainly did. Though working the whole Fargo in the big city look didn't hurt. Belle was living proof that inexperienced wasn't the same thing as naive, and it had only taken a few months of their first year at the academy for most of the rough edges to get smoothed over. Thank the Empress. If she was that sweet and innocent, she'd never survive. I'd have to go in for a mercy killing. Goddess love Willist. Somebody has to be from there. As two of the girls from off-planet, they'd gotten to know one another. After all, going home on short vacations was out of the question, and over the last year and more, an unlikely friendship had formed. Alright, Atherton was a regional capital. Still, over the last 2 centuries, it has striven to burnish its reputation as a centre for Imperial culture on the core world reach. It had worked, too. The world wasn't shill, but it was every bit the equal of any of the core colonies. It had even received approval for a 4th cliffsinger native to the world. Alright, the capital had still been staggering to see for the first time, but it was mostly a matter of scale. She'd adapted. Plutara love her. Belle could be such a hopeless case. Not often, but what was the point of going back to Willist with a top education when it was still just going back to Willist? She just needed to expand her horizons, forge real contacts. How many times have I encouraged her to make an effort? Do you think she's coming? Belda asked pensively. She was restless, walking around the crowded plaza near human food, instead of just sitting down. Relax. Of course I think so. Pris nodded. Mel said she'd be here, didn't she? She said her family lives somewhere in the capital. Maybe she just had trouble getting an autocab. Honestly, I don't know what's gotten into you since last night. Just stuff. Things, you know. Belle shifted from foot to foot. It's something Melondi needs to tell you if she wants to, okay? That's fine. Pris ran a hand through her short black hair, closed her eyes, and leaned back on the bench to take in the sun. It's just a little cold. I mean, it's barely in the mid-50s. I hope Mel shows up soon, or we can wait inside. There she is. Belle sounded more relieved than she ought to, and Pris opened her eyes and waved. Hello, stranger, Pris grinned as Mel got closer. Seems like I only saw you yesterday, and still in the academy uniform. I'm impressed. I didn't have anything informal around. Packed up, you know. Mel nodded toward the bench and sat down on her right, with Belle hovering around. I know how it is. My father was joking about turning my room into a spa when I came back this year. Pris sat up. Look, I know it's nice to see each other outside a study group, but what's going on? Belda won't say, and she's been jittery as a storm in a bottle all morning long. It's a couple of things. Your mother is the regional governess on Atherton, right? Mel fidgeted with her hands and looked around the plaza anxiously. I'm going to need some political advice. For my house. I don't want to ask anyone from the capital. I want an outside perspective, if that makes sense. All right, I can do that. My mother is a governess, and my co-mothers are a justice and a retired trade minister, who's working on the Arts Council now. I've grown up around politics every day of my life. Pris grinned, but Belda not settling down was getting her nervous. You aren't in trouble, are you? No, not exactly. I think I sort of went home to a family feud. Melondi bit her lip as she picked over her words. But it's kind of political, and I don't want to ask anyone involved in the house. A neutral opinion, Pris nodded. Got it. So, what else is going on? There's no way that's all of it. Let's talk when we're out of the crowd. Later, you know. I, needed to get out of the house. I wanted to see Vadim. Mel's face clouded over. I expect you haven't heard, but Professor Warwick was badly hurt yesterday. He's in the critical care ward. Goddess! Pris stared past Melondi. Belda, why didn't you tell me? Has anyone talked to Professor Pelavon? Shit, how's Desi? It's all kind of a long story. For later, you know? Mel got up and rubbed her arms briskly. Let's get inside. I'll tell you when we can talk, but you have to promise you'll keep a secret like the Empress depended on it. She isn't kidding, Belden muttered, as they walked into the restaurant. Look, I can understand why you don't want to talk about politics over lunch, but why didn't you tell me he's hurt? What happened? I didn't want to guess. The hospital isn't saying anything. I mean, you hear about humans in the Marines and how they can shrug off anything. But he's old enough to be our father, you know. I suppose. Pris looked past the host at the lunch crowd as they waited for a seat. Deeps, why didn't you go ask her? Mel wasn't sure about this, but there didn't seem to be any downside to the idea. It wasn't polite, and she still felt like looking over her shoulder. At least there were 6 glaives in civilian dress, walking a perimeter around the restaurant and the plaza. They were safe, or at least they mostly had to be. How many people wanted a shot at her? She'd only had a glimpse of Liam's sister, and never really seen a human woman outside of videos before. Sometimes they just seem so masculine. The woman in question was sitting at a table set for 2, with a brown leather jacket draped across the back of her chair. A black t-shirt had a logo of an interceptor, while the text proclaimed, Patrol, making sure the Navy doesn't get lost. As she stepped up to the table, the woman looked up and grinned. Well, hi there. Can I help you? Hello. Goddess, her hair was actually red. And why does she have a scar? My name is Melondi, and I have a friend who's a human, a teacher, and he's been hurt. I don't want to be rude, but I wondered if I could ask you some questions. Well, sure, darling. I'm sorry to hear about your friend. That's my partner coming back from the head, so just pull up a chair, she said earnestly. My name's Irene, but friends just call me Milk.